Hey guys, in today's video, we're going to talk about how to stop thrusting your hips in towards the golf ball. If you're one of the many golfers that have that pesky early extension, in today's video, I'm going to show you 3 simple steps on how you could fix it for good. All right, guys, last day today, Wednesday, August 18th, the last day of the flash sale for LIVEVIEW. They're offering $50 off the LIVEVIEW Pro. It's absolutely the best form of feedback that I've ever seen. You know how often I say you need feedback when you practice, and you do. This is the best feedback you can get. It's the best price point you can get. $50 off, ends tonight at midnight. I'm going to play a short video showing you how the LIVEVIEW works. Use promo code ECGolf to take advantage of that $50 off, and use the link in the description down below. I want to talk to you today about LIVEVIEW Golf. Now, you guys hear me say all the time that you need feedback when you're practicing. You need to know if you're actually doing what you're trying to do, and the best way to give yourself feedback ultimately is video. And not only is video the best way to give yourself feedback, but being able to see yourself simultaneously as you're doing a movement is the best form of video feedback. It's the best way I've seen to make changes in your swing and be able to correlate the differences between your feels and your reels. LIVEVIEW is super easy to use and set up. Simply set it up behind or in front of you. You connect it with your iPad or phone, pop that on the ground. You can actually do your practice, see yourself as you're doing it, the best way to expedite your process. I encourage you guys to check out LIVEVIEW Golf. We'll put a link in the description down below with a coupon code. All right, guys, Eric here out at the Bethlehem Golf Club. Early extension, hip thrust during the downswing. Now, a couple of pieces here that I want to get into, but if you are someone who has early extension, as with all these videos, it's way easier for me to help you way more if I can see your swing. The way we can do that is at CogornoGolf.com. Send in your swing, get real answers to your questions, get real solutions to your problems, get real practice plans. CogornoGolf.com. You can schedule a 15-minute phone call with myself. I'd love to chat with you, put a plan together. We'll put that down below. And if this helps fix your early extension, click that little gray like button for us. That would be appreciated as well. Hip thrust towards the ball, right? So at some point, what we see with a lot of golfers, probably 80+%, is the hips working too far in towards the golf ball during the downswing. So we would say too much extension too early, not enough of the rotation or the tilting pieces. 2 things here. Number 1, if you have early extension, there's a very, very, very high likelihood that you have something going on earlier in your swing, and your brain is using that early extension to fix it. So what that means is very likely your club face is too open, the downswing is too far over the top or steep, or you have some form of poor setup, poor backswing. I'm talking 80% really conservative. So I'm gonna skip by that, right? But you shouldn't skip by that. Watch all the videos we have on club face, on club path, send me your videos. Very high likelihood. Okay, so keep that in mind as you're doing this. If you're like, well, how come I can fix my early extension without a ball, but as soon as I put a ball down, my body early extends? Telltale sign you've got something earlier on fixing it. That's like 99% sure. Okay, with that aside, the second part of this, when you see a golfer, if you're someone who the hips push in towards the ball during the downswing, 7 out of every 10 of those that I see on Cogorno Golf, either the issue starts during the setup or during the backswing with their hips, meaning either they set up with their hips too far back or their hips are actually moving in during the backswing. I tell you that to say, before we go right into these downswing drills, we have to make sure the hips are correct at setup and during the backswing. Here's how I would practice this. I have a 7-iron here, and I'm gonna take my normal setup position. Now I set my bag up here on purpose. You could use a chair or a wall for this. I have my driver here about a hand width behind my rear end. Okay, PG-13 version. So I'm standing here, I got a hand width to my driver. Now, when I take my setup, what I want to avoid are my hips going too far back. When my hips go too far back at setup and I reach an end range of motion, I have nowhere to go but forward. There's some anomalies that I see who have their hips back and stay back. They are 1 out of 100 at best. 99 out of 100 golfers who have their hips too far back, usually way too far on their heels, are gonna kick their hips in just as a like survival mechanism. Their brain doesn't wanna fall over. Here's how you know your hips are good at setup. Stand up just normal, one hand width behind the driver. Bend your knees just a little bit. I want the kneecaps over the balls of the feet. That's roughly the end of your shoelaces. Now from there, you should be able to bend down to the golf ball without your butt hitting that object one hand width behind. So when you do that now, the pressure you should feel on the balls of your feet, again, we'll call that the end of your shoelaces. Stand up straight, bend your knees over the balls of your feet, step one. My upper body's still all the way up. Now I'm gonna bend down to the ball without my butt going back to this. So the center of my hips, I want to sit basically over the center of my ankle. If your center of hips sit too far back of your ankle, you're gonna get that early extension. So piece number one, and if this feels really different to you, that's a telltale sign that you have an issue here. Knees bent, round over without hitting the object. Again, it's one hand width behind, and just feel that. I bet a lot of you will feel like, whoa, my pressure feels more forward than normal. I don't want it on your toes, I want it on the balls of the feet. Now your hips are underneath you to start, so you actually have room to create some hip depth, which is part number two. Okay, so part number two, once you have your hips under you at the setup position. So I'm not touching this. And just one other little quick thing, your belt line shouldn't also be like way tilted down towards the ground. You wanna feel like your belt line is more level at setup. It's gonna be tilted down a little bit, but more level with the belt line. Now during the backswing, the huge error we see are the hips working too far in. And you can usually always see this with the left hip working too far towards the ball and or the right hip not gaining enough depth. So what I would like you to feel during the backswing, if you want to fix this hip thrust, is that your right hip pushes back. It's going to push up and back, but it pushes back to the point where you actually hit this object. So once you do your setup, it goes from a hand width to about an inch. I want you to actually push your right butt cheek up and back during the backswing without your left hip working too far in towards the ball. Really good visual for this that one of our coaches at Cogorno Golf, lots of plugs this video, JT Thomas, had mentioned was the idea that I've got this like wall here, right in front of my hips when I set up. And he said, hey, make your backswing turn, feel that right hip go back, and don't let that hip work into that wall. This would be the working in motion towards the wall. Your hip, if you have this wall here, should stay under and inside of that as my right hip, and I'm exaggerating a little bit, right? But as my right hip pushes back, my left hip stays back as well. This is the first part where I'm creating hip depth. So one hand width, right? I'm gonna repeat this 100 times. One hand width, knees are bent over the balls of the feet, bend down without hitting the driver or the object. Step two, push that, so pressure on the balls of the feet, push that right hip up and back without your left hip working forward. Right hip up and back. That's gonna be part two. That's gonna help you create some hip depth during the backswing. And this is such a beautiful way to practice this because you have instant feedback. Do one more, hand width, knees over the balls of the feet, get to the ball without hitting it. Probably feel more pressure on the balls of your feet. Might feel like less knee bend for some of you. Belt line's more level. Backswing, I'm pushing my hip up and back. My hip's more back and higher than my left. My left hip doesn't work in towards the ball. So my hips are under me. I'm gonna create depth with my right hip during the backswing. And that feels really, really nice. Like I've got a lot of room with my hips during the downswing. Okay, part number three from there, and keeping in mind, if you do the setup and the backswing right, that will cure 3/4 of us who have these issues with the hip thrust from getting those correct. If you take it a step farther and ensure your club face angle is appropriate coming down, that means the toe is at least on top of the heel, maybe slightly in front of it, and you ensure your club path is good, that means that last parallel the club head's even with or just inside your hands. If you get club path, club face, and those first two hip pieces, 95% of the downswing hip thrust will go away. Isn't that crazy to think about? 95% of the downswing hip thrust will go away if you get those pieces earlier. That means if you come in and just jump right to step 3, odds are that's not going to fix it, right? You got to go back to the root cause. That's so important. So let's say I've got this first piece, the setup, hips underneath me. Let's say I create the hip depth with my trail hip during my backswing going back without my left hip going too far forward. Now from there, ideally, I should just be able to swing. If not, if I'm still struggling from there, I've got a couple of options in terms of feels. I can feel my left hip start to go down and around and create some depth so I get my left butt cheek and side of my hip back to the bag as well. I can feel my right hip stay higher and stay back in early transition. If you're someone who gets up on the toes too early and the hip comes in, your right hip goes up and back, higher than the left and more back. Keep it back and high in transition. That's another feel you're going to have. And then you can go from there. But a lot of people will feel the right hip up and back and now get the left hip down and around. That's generally going to be the feeling. But I'm telling you, if you get those earlier pieces correct, you shouldn't have to do so much at this point. So I got one hand width. It's the last time, I promise. Knees bent down. So now I'm only like an inch from it. Pressure on the balls of my feet. My belt line feels, I feel like this, right? Like tucked underneath you. If this is new for you, confirm it with video. Right hip pushes up and back into it. Left hip doesn't go too far forward. Left hip now goes down and around to where my seam line feels like it hits it on the way through. Under me, right hip up and back, left hip down and around. And that's how you can create hip depth. And this should work 100% of the time. Like this is one of those things where like if you go do it and it doesn't work right away, it's not like, oh, that drill doesn't work. That's not right. You didn't do it correctly, or something earlier on is jacking it up. So a couple things here. Make sure you have the prerequisites. Club face is square enough. Club shaft is inside enough. Your brain, when it early extends, that's a move that shallows the shaft. It's a shallowing move, meaning it makes the club path more inside and it also shallows your angle of attack. When you shallow it, it gets your torso farther from the ground, which is going to make your wrist flip, which is a squaring club face mechanism. So this early extension a lot of times is your brain fixing an open club face or fixing a steep downswing. So you've got to address that first, or at least in combination with this. Next, get the setup correct. Like do this in this order, right? Then the backswing, then the downswing. This is a beautiful drill that will work. If you do this and it works good on a practice, no ball, doesn't work when the ball goes in, that means your brain's doing it for a reason. You got something earlier. I would highly suggest you try CogornoGolf.com. You could send us in your videos. Myself and our expert coaches can pinpoint the solution so you can stop wasting time practicing things that aren't actually changing your swing. If you've watched our videos, you've seen my evolution of my swing change. You know why? Because I work with the coaches we have, okay? I take their advice, I take my own advice. We put practice plans in place. There's real solutions to these issues. I would try CogornoGolf.com. Hopefully this helps you. Any questions, leave a comment down below. We're gonna put another card on the screen for a similar video. We'll also put CogornoGolf.com. Would love for you to check that out.